Right, everybody got that?
Yeah. Have you got me on to share as well, Robin?
Now I'm just going to put you on now. Okay.
Can you hear me?
All right, you're
We can hear you.
Lovely.
okay. Just waiting for Bez.
The last one.
I'm here.
Right, okay. Well, when we stopped last time, that's where we got to. We've done about half of the presentation. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the second part of the presentation. And we're going to start with, hang on, let me see. Right. Hold on. Right. I'm just trying to get my control back. Okay, that's better. I've got it. Right, we're going to go to the second part of the presentation, which starts with preparation. Now, contrary to what I said last week, which was a load of codswallop, we didn't mean to be, but it turned out that way. About compasses, may I emphasise the fact that Paul was correct and I made quite a boo-boo because I was misjudged something, is compasses do not work very, very well on metal wrecks underwater. Right? And that doesn't matter which compass it is, even a shearwater, unless it's a gyro compass. If it's a gyro compass, then you can use it. So, you know, you can only use a compass for aid of navigation on a wreck if the wreck that you're on is something like an aircraft that's made of aluminium or non-metallic, wooden vessels, that sort of thing. So, aid to navigation. You look at aid to navigation. Basic wreck construction is a good idea. It gives you a good idea of when you're diving a wreck. You know, if you know what sort of wreck it is that you're diving, you know the basic construction of the wreck, you should be able to navigate your way around that wreck with not too much problem. So what you need to know is, what is the wreck? You know, what is it you're diving on? And that will help you to find out the features of the wreck. And so when you come across it, you'll roughly know where you are on that wreck, because most ships are built differently or laid out differently. Oil tankers, for instance, everything's up the back end. You might have a small island in the middle of it for the officers' accommodation and the bridge, but normally everything's up the back end, and everything up the front is allocated to fuel storage. So that's a good idea. If you come down and you've got this great massive load of superstructure at the end, and then nothing but flat deck and bits and pieces, from there on, you can more or less say, yeah, I'm on a super tanker or I'm on an oil tanker. And if I keep going that way, I'll come up to the pointy end. And I say, winches are a good giveaway at the front end. You'll have all your anchor winches, etc. So that's another giveaway. So the various types of ship have a basic type of design. And if you know what the wreck is, that will also enable you to dive the wreck and navigate the wreck. Also, knowing what happened to it. You know, how did it sink? Did it blow up? Because if it blew up, bits of it might be all over the place. If it ran on the rocks, again, it might have broke its back and be in two halves. So knowing how it sunk. If you go to Egypt on the well-known reef out there, there's about six wrecks there, and they're all up on the reef, either up that way with the bow at the top, and that's the normal position, and then the stern is rather deeper than the bow. So again, know how did it happen? What made it sink? Reading wreck reports, right? That will also give you an idea of, what it is you're going to dive on. And you can get wreck reports from the web, magazines and books, right? look for large features that are likely to remain. You know, as the wreck, if the wreck is an old wreck and it's started to deteriorate, right, you may not have a lot of the structure still in place. But some of the bits and pieces that were on the wreck, the larger pieces, will still be there. So you might find boilers, you might find engines, you might find capstans, you might find masts, and the bow and that sort of thing. So there's certain parts of the wreck which were probably stronger and will survive longer and not deteriorate so quick. All right, so that's another one to look for. So you can recognize something as you're diving along, you can recognize where you are, and it gives you an idea of how far along the wreck you've gone, and therefore how far you've got to go to get back. Next one, of course, is skippers and local knowledge. We use some very, very good, well-seasoned skippers for our club dives who know the area like the back of their hands. Most of them have already dived it and can give you a lot of information about the dive, where to go, what to look for next. All right. And if you know other groups that have dived it or other divers in the club that have dived that same wreck, you can ask them and they'll give you the knowledge that will make your dive a little bit more interesting and eventful as you go along. All right. What is the orientation? I'll be very, very careful about that. But again, you can find out how deep is it? How's it laying? Is it laying on its side? Is it laying upside down? See, I didn't do a lot of investigation before I went up to Scapa Flow, which I wished I had, because I was looking or thinking that I was going to see some nice big guns still in their position on the ship, but I didn't realise at that point in time, or it hadn't dawned on me, that most of these ships, or a majority of them up there, were scuttled, and because of their big guns, they all turned upside down, and are now laying on the seabed with their hulls proud, and the rest of the bits and pieces all hidden underneath the vessel. So again, knowing the orientation of the vessel, you go and dive something like Zenobia in Cyprus, it lies on its side, right? So one part of it's around about 17 meters, the next part of it's at 42 meters. So know the orientation of your vessel, because it's quite an interesting dive and you can get disorientated. Research. You can find out most of this stuff on the internet. You can go to museums. Any of the museums will give you an idea. You can look at the wreck registers, right? And previous exploration dives. So if you've dived it before or somebody else has dived it before, you get knowledge of the wreck. I think there's the one that we dived in Northern Ireland had been dived a lot by the divers that were diving there, and they were still learning a lot about the wreck, and they were building up the knowledge and the layout of that wreck every time they dived. So, moving on, he says. Right, now, equipment for wreck diving. It says at the top there, minimum requirement. I don't know. I suppose, yeah, you could say that. But let's look first of all at lights, right? 2 lights, a primary and a backup. Right? I wouldn't dive any wreck without a primary and a backup light. Now, that's not just for looking inside the wreck, going inside the wreck or swimming around the wreck. That's also there for me for signalling, because most of these wrecks are fairly dark, and around the coast of the UK, you don't really ever get perfect visibility, as you will do if you dive in the tropics or Egypt for that matter, right? So the light has to be there to enable you to signal your buddy. it has to be also good enough to enable you to see what you're looking for inside of a wreck. But I think I said last week when we talked about lights, just because it says it's got 3,500 lumens, don't take it that that's the best light in the world. Because if it's got 3,500 lumens and it's a wide beam, in silt or in, let's say, misty or murky conditions, you won't see very, very much because all that light's going to come back at you. So what you want is a slightly less lumen but smaller beam primary light, which will actually cut its way through, and you'll see more of the wreck and you'll be able to signal your buddy a lot easier. So lights, at least 2 lights, 1 primary, 1 backup. Cutting devices, again, 2. All right, why do we say 2? Just in case I lose one, or just in case I can't get my hands on it. All right, so I'm going to have 2 different types of cutting devices. Now, the reason we take cutting devices on dives like wrecks is because, as we said last week, the possibility is that wreck is going to be covered in nets if it's in an area that's good for marine life and fish, or it's going to be covered in line, or it's going to have a lot of old bits of rope, etc., that could be just hanging around in that wreck, and you could get snagged. So you need different types of cutter. A line cutter is very good for net, but a small line cutter will not do for larger ropes. It's also ease of operation. Line cutters are very, very easy to use. You just place them on the obstruction, pull them down, and it will sever the line. But you might have to use a set of snips, right? Or you might buy a rather expensive dual purpose snips plus knife, right? But whatever you do, you've got to stow that where you can get at it, because that's when you're going to need it. You're going to need it more or less straight away as soon as you get snagged, or as soon as you need to cut something there. So you want to know where it is, and it needs to be located in a place where you can get hold of it. And the secondary means of cutting also needs to be put somewhere where you can get your hands on it pretty quick. If you drop your primary cutters, you need your secondary cutters, and you won't have the joy of being able to look around everywhere to find them. Now we're coming on to reels, right? My favourite. I've got a lot of them. Too many. I'm going to have to give some away. We got 2 reels we need to carry, right? We need to carry a reel that we can use as a bottom reel, and a reel that we can use as a DSMB. And then it also says an emergency spool and finger reel. And let's go back first of all to the bottom reel. The bottom reel, if you're a dedicated rust head and you like diving and you're going to do a lot of dive entry or lay in line over a wreck, then you really want to use a wreck reel or a bottom reel. The difference between a wreck reel and an ordinary DSMB reel, it doesn't have a ratchet. The locking device is a knurled thumb screw that actually you twist and you lock the reel. When you're actually using the reel, you use your finger or fingers to tension that reel, and you allow it to play out and lock it only when you want to stop and do a tie off. Whereas with the other type of reel, you have to physically disconnect the ratchet to run the line up if you're using a DSMB reel. By all means, you can use it. You can use a finger spool, providing it's got sufficient line for you to lay out. You've all seen a finger spool, right? So carry at least 2. If you're going to lay line, have a dedicated line laying reel, right? And if you lose that reel and you've got to put a DSMB up, you use a dedicated DSMB reel to put the DSMB up, right? Some people carry a 3rd reel just in case they're going to put something else up on the way up from the wreck, right? DSMBs, again, the recommended is we have 2 DSMBs, right? Again, it all depends on how you're diving, what sort of wreck you're diving, and what sort of depths and time scale you're going to be diving in. If you're diving deep wreck and you're doing decompression and you've got decompression gases, right, then really you need to have a secondary DSMB of a yellow colour that you will put to the surface as an emergency marker should anything go wrong. But we're not going to cover that in detail, but that's what you would need. So you would look at the type of diving you're actually going to do and work out, what do I actually need? Now, most DSMBs are orange and most emergency DSMBs are yellow, right? But that's something you agree with everybody that's on the dive and the boat skipper. You can use a lift bag. I've seen people use lift bags. You know, they go down there because they're thinking they're going to lift a treasure, right? But they can use their lift bag for other things. But the trouble with a lift bag, it's rather cumbersome. And because it says lift bag, believe me, it has a lot of lift. Right, and if you don't get it right, you can find yourself coming up very, very fast attached to a lift bag. Right, so again, lift bags are available, but you only take a lift bag if you've got sufficient air to inflate that lift bag and you've got a definite use for that lift bag. Alternate air sources. We've all got an alternate air source. The recommendation here is that one of those the alternate air source should be on a long hose, right? Now, it should be 1.5 millimeters or preferably 2 meters long and stowed in such a way that it's not going to snag off. Now, why would I want an alternate air source with a hose that long? Anybody like to add? No?
Somebody's stuck in an area that you can't get at them.
Yeah, right. If I had to do a rescue, or if I had to follow somebody out of a wreck using their alternate air source, I would find it bloody hard on an ordinary AS, right? Because an ordinary AS, you normally give it to the other party facing them face to face. But sometimes the confines of a wreck, you can't do that. So one of your alternate air source preferably should be on a long hose. Right, dive slate. If I want to write you a love letter underwater and I've got nowhere to do it, I've got a dive slate. So I can tell you what I think and what I want you to do by writing it on a slate and showing it to you. I can also use a dive slate to hold my dive plan so that I've got a backup plan backed up against my computer, or in case my computer fails. Right? I've got another form of reference in my hand. Also, a dive slate can be sent up with a DSMB to tell the skipper of the boat, get the kettle on, I'm on my way up, right? Or please do something quick because I've got a problem, right? So we have to carry, or we should carry, a dive slate. And the last bit is stowage, streamlining and snagging. Now, I am not going to hold myself up as an example of a perfectly rigged diver when I go in the water. Sometimes I've got a tendency of getting in the water looking like a bloody Christmas tree. I've got things hanging off all over the place. I try not to, but occasionally I fail, right? What we're saying there is when you're diving in restricted areas like a wreck, right, the last thing you want to do is leave things hanging down below you or off you that could pose a snagging risk. But also you want to be streamlined, right? Because the more stuff that you add to the water is drag. And the more drag you've got, the more air you will consume, right? So we want to look quite nice when we're doing it. I can always remember back when I first dived with my first GUE, Global Underwaters Explorer diver, and he really bawled me out about the way that I was, my kit was hanging, because them boys don't dive with everything has to be in a certain place. So you do learn, but the whole idea about it is if it's stowed correctly, streamlined, and there's no snagging hazards, you're going to enjoy your dive a lot better. Right, moving on. Okay, this one's over to you, Bez. You can take over, mate.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we're just going to be talking about the reels themselves and laying the reels. As Robin's already mentioned, that you've got probably a dedicated line and reel that doesn't have a ratchet, unlike your SMB reel, so that you can just reel it out and just use your hands to control the line as it goes out, just using your fingers or one finger, and keeping the tension all the time. So it doesn't have a ratchet on it. And you can see in the picture there that you've got sort of two types of reel. And I'll say it here at the time, you can see that you've got different colors. So laying lines, jumping down to the bottom of the screen there, having different colors to denote the difference between your DSMB line and a bottom line is probably a good idea. And more often than not, these are heavier line than your normal SMB line. The non-clutch reels, they're basically like a spool. You can just reel it out as you need it, and then tying off as you go along. It talks about having a loop for primary tie-off. There's a couple of pictures coming up later on, and I don't know if you can see this. I've got this extra thick line here, but basically having a large loop like this, if you look at my screen, you've got a large loop that you can put the reel through. So you wrap that around your tie-off point and put your line through it. And then you've also got this thing at the end full of woody. And that's just another loop. It can be a ball or an O-ring. And the idea of that is to, once you've tied off, when you're coming back at the end of your run, is to use your gloved hand to pull that loose so that you've got a bigger loop, right? Trying to get your finger around what it is you tied onto. So it's an ease of release type mechanism. And it should be fitted in such a way that it can't be untied or it can't come loose. And that's one of the sort of key elements of that. Just going to move on to the next slide. So line colors, different things. I used to have an SMB reel that had weighted shot line on it, and it had about 50 meters of line, but that got lost a few years back. Trying to do a rescue. Somebody else borrowed it and lost it. I haven't been able to get another shotted line since, but the heavy line just basically stays towards the bottom, so you're not going to get tangled up on it. So using a different DSMB, different reel DSMB, no ratchet, and maintaining your finger to keep the brake on, if you like. If it's the heavier sort of line, then it should sink to some extent, but you don't want it to sink so far down that it's going to go into the silt and start disturbing the silt. So you want it to be a little bit of a distance away from the wreck. I should have said about your primary line, that'll come on later on, but when you do your primary tie-off, then you should have another tie-off really close to that in case the first one fails. Using a finger spool, you can see in the bottom of the screen there, it gives you a better look at the loop, the primary loop with a woody at the end of it here. So that sort of gives you the idea you can actually then push your pull that out and then get your reel back out again. Obviously, you need to fix it somewhere you can get at it and use it. The smaller line there is very often where you've done a line out and you want to take a slight tangent off to look at something else, and then you can come back to the main line. But also as a redundant one. So if you should lose a line, your reel, you've got one as a safety reel, which you can also use as an emergency to deploy an SMB. Like everything else, they need to be accessible. I'll mention no names. You go back, sorry. But I dived with one guy on a couple of occasions, and he's always playing around with his gear. And when he needed his stuff, he could never find where it was, because he always put it in a different place because he thought it was going to be easier. And on one particular occasion, this chap spent about 5 minutes, nearly 10 minutes underwater when we lost each other because he couldn't find his primary SMB reel. So putting everything where you can find it, finger touch, so that you know where they are and they're easily unclipped for your use. Your line is your route back to safety. So having some idea, like Robin said, having some idea your orientation of your wreck, so you've got a mental picture of where you're going, even to the extent that if you do lose a line, at least you then got some idea of how you're going back or which way you're going back, so you can have to find it again. Keeping it under control, keep it under tension. You can see in the picture here that you're going to see the primary tie-off. This is going to be on the shot line, hopefully, or very, very close to it. But if it's onto the shot line, which is what we've been saying on the last session, is that you're going to go back up the shot, or potentially just away off it. Gareth mentioned the fact that our standard procedure really is to go down the shot line and then just wander off and do our wreck exploration and come away from the wreck, deploy an SMB and come on up. But this is purely for, I would say, major wreck investigations. Keep it low, keep it tight. Belay as regular as you think you need to be. A belay means basically tying it off. Finding something that you can latch onto and do a tie and move on to the next place, keeping that line reasonably taut. And using proper tie-offs, we'll see a couple of slides later on to show you what sort of tie-offs they look like, if you haven't already experienced these. As I've mentioned, think about visualizing your wreck. It's a 3D sort of orientation. If you're going to go out on a particular route, you know you're going to come back to the shot line. So think about how that orientation works on the reverse angle. It's like when you're going out orienteering out in the wild somewhere. You always look behind you to see what you can look, sort of, again, pilotage. What are you looking for? Avoid sharp objects. So if you can do a tie-off, make sure you're checking what it is you're going to tie off to, that it's not actually a rusted piece of steel sticking up, maybe covered in marine life, anemones and things like that, dead man's fingers, so that when you do a wrap around, that it's not going to actually cut the line off and then you're starting off again from the beginning. So this slide here, you can see we've got it's part of the wreck. We've got our giant loop or big loop, and we're going to push the reel through it. Doesn't show a woolly on the end of this one, but if you think about it logically, if you put that on, it's going to be nice, really taut. When you come back, you're going to try to get your gloved fingers underneath that to try to release it to get your reel back out again. So having the woody on it, which could be, as I said, a ball or an O-ring, just to give it that extra little pull so you get it out. Then you can do a secondary tie-off. And this is a clove hitch. Again, the BZAC guidelines suggest that this should be sort of round about a foot, 300 300 millimeters away from your primary tie-off, so that if there's anything goes wrong with your primary, then you've got your secondary. Sorry, cool. Very sensitive mouse this. Sorry guys, there you go. As a safety net, and that also helps to guide you back onto when you're coming back from your little trip out, to say that you're now at this point. You've recognized that as being your secondary tie-off, and it should be somewhere near the edge of the wreck, so that once you get that point, you know that you can actually move away from the wreck and you can deploy your SMB without it put the right teeth in a minute, fouling up. This one here is your line wrap. As you can see, what happens, you just go round whatever it is you found to wrap around, and then you put your reel under or over and then carry on, keeping that line tight at all times. And this one here is just a temporary, you just go around and change direction. It's called a placement. Not as secure. It can dislodge. Effectively, you're better to use a line wrap if you can. But it is an alternative way of changing direction. The initial, the primary tie-off should be as close to open water as you can get. As I've said, pushing your reel through the loop and putting it reasonably tight, and then moving off to your secondary tie-off. Should be in open water and must be distinguishable from your primary and other line wraps, so that you can actually know that you're at a point where you're close to the shot line. You're talking about only a foot or so away from your shot line. And using alternative clove hitch is one of the ideal ones, easy to do. Anybody done a clove hitch before?
Yay!
I think so.
Well, Gareth has, and those who've done quite right. But those who haven't, it's basically just taking two loops and crossing one over the other. The line wraps, quite simple and easy to use, and easy to release as well. I've always intrigued by this picture that in most of the BZAC shot pictures, that they're always in straight lines. I've yet to go down a straight line shot. But as we've got here, we've got your primary tie-off. We're going to go across to the wreck, do our secondary tie-off, and then we're going to start following our wreck orientation. Going through this presentation, it talks about the lead diver and the buddy. At no point in this presentation does it actually mention the fact that when we dive a wreck, we probably have a boatload of people. Are they going to lay their own lines, or are they going to follow the one that the lead pair is going to lay out for them? Now, my thinking here, of course, is that once you start to decide you're going to do line laying, then the whole boat crew team needs to be aware or be recognizing the fact that they're all going to follow the same line, or they're just going to go off independently. But if the visibility is bad, then following that same line is going to be paramount. So they all need to know where you're going to go on the wreck and which direction. So that needs to be agreed as part of the dive plan.
Can I add something there, Bez?
Carry on, mate.
If you're putting, quite all the dives I've done where we've done lines have normally been to get us back to the shot.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's been a shot back to the surface type dive. Some sites, like out of Dover, you do not do a dive unless you turn to the shot. So you have to line out and line back. Mm-hmm. If you go down and there is a line already tied off, you are supposed to tie your line below the first line so that the returning pair have an unencumbered access to release their line. So you're not supposed to go over the top of somebody else's line. It just makes life complicated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, mate. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
And effectively, at when you get to the high point of your dive, it's also recommended that what you don't want to do is to go down to recover your shot. So you need to have your primary tie off as high up as possible, so that you can actually sort of follow it through and then return back to that shot.
Right. I take
Over to you,
over.
Robin.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Right. Okay, we're going to do now line following. Right. So again, I think it's what Gareth said. I mean, most of the dives that we do, we normally go down, go on the wreck, and come back, and when we get to a point, we've usually got clear overhead, up goes the bag, and we'll come up on a bag. All agreed. But if you've got to go along a line and come back along a line, you've got to know how to actually travel along that line. All right? Once the line's been laid, and let's assume now that the line has been laid and we're all going to use the same line. All right? So somebody's already laid the line and we're going to use that same line. So we come down the shot, and I would then take hold of the line and play the line between my finger and my thumb. Now, the direction of my thumb will mean the direction of travel. So let's say I'm on the, they're getting it right now, the left-hand side of the boat, which would make me on the port side of the boat, right? I would then say I'm going to move up the line. My thumb would tell me which way I'm going. Now, when I get to the other end, I should always have my thumb on that line in that direction. Now, when I get to the other end, which says to me, I'm like that, says to me, right, I've got to turn round. Before I turn round, but again, when I'm going down there, I don't want to put too much tension on the line, right? And I want my arm to be extended clear of my body and equipment. It's very much like when you're doing an SMB, right? You've got the SMB reel away from you, so there's no chance of you snagging the SMB or that line. And it's exactly the same here. So you'd follow it round, and when you get to the point of turn round or swapping sides, you don't let go until your other hand is in, has got hold of the line. So let's say I'm stopping, right? And I've got the post and I've got the line there and the other side of the line's on that side. Before I let go of the line there, I make sure I've got contact with the line the other side. Then I bring my hand over and carry on in that direction. When I get to the other end and I'm going to come back, I will just change my direction. So instead of it being on the left-hand side, it'll be on the right-hand side, which will then take me back, right? And it says signals. If I'm receiving a signal, I keep hand in contact with the line. If I'm giving a signal, I keep one there and I use my other hand to pull and grip the line and give the necessary signal, right? But I never, ever let go of the line just in case I can't find it again. If the visibility is really bad and I can't find that line, as Bez says, I get disorientated and I don't know which direction I've got to go back to get to the shot unless I can get back to the line, all right? So the point being, if you're on a line and you're following a line, don't let go of the line. Always keep contact of that line. You've got two hands, so use each hand to make sure you maintain contact with the line. Any questions on that? No?
No.
Good. I didn't want to go back. Right. Signaling. Again, this is, looking at two divers going down a fixed line, right? And you're in a visibility or poor visibility, or you're using torches, right? The diver following, the diver that's leading, right? It's no good him shining his light up the other diver's bum, because the other diver ain't going to see it, right? So I don't know whether you're behind me or not. What you should do is to shine your light in a position off to one side of me that I can see, right? And then I know you're there. Now, if I can't see your light beam, I don't switch my light off to see if your light comes back on again, right? What I do is I cover my own light and then I look for your light, but I don't switch my light off, right? So if I can't see the light beam, right, I cover my own beam, right, and see there the signal to your buddy. Right, as soon as I cover, you should realise that I can't see your beam and bring your beam back where I can see it. Make sense?
Mm.
Right. Now, additional signals. Now, we have used, well, for those divers that haven't actually been in the water yet, even diving in Stony Cove and Gildenberg, sometimes you'll find that you will not be able to see the OK signal or I'm not happy signal because of the visibility. But you will be able to see a light. And what we do is, I will supply you, or we will supply you with a form of light so that we can see that you're OK. Now, the signal you use would be, if you're OK, you would shine your light, or I would shine my light first of all and give you a circle. Now, if you saw that O being inscribed on a flat surface or the bed, seabed, you would then mimic that circle again where I can see it, so I know you're OK, right? And if you're not OK, right, or I'm not OK, I would then push my light backwards and forwards across like that, okay? And if you saw that, you would know there was a problem. If I saw you doing that, I would know there is a problem. So under normal circumstances, your beam is where I can see it, right? If I'm okay and I want to see if you're okay, I will give you the O. And if you are not okay, you won't give me an O back, but you'll give me, no, I'm not. And then we will stop and try and sort out the problem. But rapid waving of a torch or any rapid random movement normally tells the lead diver that the diver behind has got a problem, or if it's a lead diver that does it, it tells the diver behind that the lead diver's got a problem, or is foreseeing some problem there, right? And that's the passive signalling we use with a light when we're diving wrecks or poor visibility. Moving on. Now, I must say that I have not ever used this sort of signalling, but it's line signalling. And again, from what I'm reading on this, the assumption is that you are talking about a basic roped diver signal. So the diver is roped either to somebody in front, or the diver is roped to, let's say, the vessel above. But a one pull, right, to that diver, it says there the surface diver or the diver buddy, right, one pull means I am okay. Right, so you get one pull, it means I'm okay. If you pull back once, it means you're okay. Two pulls means stay put. Two pulls by you means I'm stationary. Three pulls means go down or away from me. Three pulls by you says you've understood my signal and you're going down. Four pulls would mean come up to or towards me. So if I'm pulling 4 times, right, I'm either the surface diver or the diving leader. I pull it 4 times. You mimic that signal, means you've understood and you are coming up towards me. A continuous pull, right, come to the surface. And a continuous pull from you means bring me to the surface. And no answer is obvious. If I don't get an answer, you've got a problem and you ain't there. So you need help. All right. As I said, I've never actually used these signals, but they are universal diving signals, or at least BSAT diving signals. So I've never ever dived with somebody that I've actually been physically roped to. But it would be a case if you were diving with a John line, right? With a buddy line. You could have a buddy line on in very, very poor visibility, and that's a way of ensuring that your buddy understands what it is you want to do, okay? But if you know you're going to get to that situation, you should go through that first of all. Protocols. Oh, I thought I'd taken all them off. I didn't. The following right of way. Yeah. Okay. The following right of way. I like this one. Yeah. Who has the right of way on the line? Right? The divers with the obvious problem. So if you're on a line and you know, and somebody's on the line as well, who gets the right of way? Well, it's the diver with the problem. And this is the same with the shot line, right? Ascending divers have the priority of coming up a shot line. The descending diver will make way for the ascending diver, or he will give the ascending diver assistance if there's a problem. Divers ascending a shot line, all right? They have right of way. So it's no good you sort of all get into a little gang saying, you bastards, you ain't coming by me. Remember, if it's a deep dive, they're on a deco program, right? And they have to get to a certain depth in a certain time to run their deco program. If you hinder them, you are interrupting their deco run. And that could have very, very grave consequences at the end of the day. Divers exiting a wreck, right? If they're exiting the wreck and you're outside on the line, they get the right of way, okay? Because normally they've been in there, they may have consumed more air than they planned, so you let them come out, you don't hinder their exit. And to summarise where we've been over the whole lot, right? We've done shot line safety last week, phases of a dive, right? The phases are going down, leaving the shot, going to the wreck, diving the wreck, coming back to the shot, joining the shot, coming up the shot, right? They're the phases of a shot line dive. We've done line laying techniques, and we covered safer wreck diving, right? The different solutions to different scenarios that we could have when we're diving a wreck. The extra equipment that we need to dive a wreck. As I said, that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, we've got to have, but if we are doing a dedicated wreck dive, okay, we should have the correct equipment to do that wreck dive, right? The same as we're doing a prolonged dive, we should have extra air or extra gas if we need to carrying it. And we covered using a shot line. As Bez said, we come down, we tie. Again, this all depends on how good the boat crew is at dropping a shot. If they're going to drop a shot on a wreck, if they're very, very good, and they've done it before, they should be able to get that shot alongside that wreck. Right? They should be able to get the shot alongside the wreck. Or if they're very clever, they might even get it onto the wreck. So it's not always a good practice. And then you come down. As Bez said, you lay off a line. If you're slightly away from the wreck on the shot line, you lay a line, primary tie off, higher than the point that you're going to leave the wreck, okay? Because you don't want to go back down to the bottom of the shot for many reasons, not at the end of a dive. So you lie a little bit higher, and then you come onto the wreck and you tie off on a secondary tie off, and that becomes the point through which you start to lay your line. And then when you lay your line, you come back. And if you're leading and you've got the line, they'll go back in front of you. You'll wind the line in. You'll get to that secondary point, right? Why you should want to put a DSMB up at that point, not sure. If you've got the shot line and you know where it is. But at that point, you will then move yourself onto the line, secure your shot line reel out the way, and proceed up the line to finish your dive. Always make the plan that you've got sufficient time to get back to the shot, get yourself comfortable before you start your ascent. So you can do your ascent in a nice controlled manner. And the signals, right? The line signals, using the line and knowing how to read light signals in an emergency. Okay, any questions?
Okay, just a point that I'd like to make. Going back to Paul's first session about buoyancy and trim, anything with all this kit that you're going to be carrying down, the extra reels, extra torches, maybe heavier line, that's going to have an effect on your buoyancy. So you need to be aware of that. So if you're going to take this extra heavy kit, then you may need to shed some lead that you previously wouldn't have had or would have had. So it's looking at what you're going to carry, how much extra weight is that going to make, and what sort of effect it's going to have on your buoyancy. Those sort of things need to be thought about, and as we said previously, any alteration to your kit configuration, taking either putting stuff on, taking some off, may have an effect on your buoyancy. So you need to be aware of that. The other thing, I don't know, Robin, that handout that I put together and the video link,
Yeah,
do you want to push that out?
Yeah, well, I think we got a little small video on line laying, and there's also a written handout on shot line, is it, or is it
Bottom line.
bottom line? Right.
Yeah, it's just basically showing some more photographic versions of how to tie off and things like that. So it's a very simple handout. It's only one page, but we can push that out.
We'll put that on the forum.
Supplement. Yeah.
We'll put it on the forum and it'll be on the forum, and then I'll stick on the WhatsApp the link. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, everybody then.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you very much for your time, and
Thank
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.